Vaurik Dreshaal loved numbers the way some beings loved music. On the trading ring above the blue-white star of Quorathi, the numbers danced for him. Holo columns of shifting values, currency symbols in a dozen scripts, profit curves like mountain ranges of light. Vaurik's compound eyes tracked them all, his frilled ears twitching with each tiny beep of an algorithmic trade executed. Around him, the elite of half the galaxy murmured and watched. Syrian magnates in layered silks, Palikar guildmasters with jeweled tendrils, Quorathi diplomats sipping translucent drinks. The ring's observation deck was a theater, and Vaurik was the star. His latest acquisition, an entire shipping consortium that controlled 3 major hyperlane spurs, had just finalized. The numbers confirmed what he already knew. With this move and a few complementary trades, he could choke supply to any mid-tier world in the outer arcs within a standard month. He absorbed the satisfaction, filed it away. Power, properly used, was best savored slowly. "Congratulations, Dreshaal." The voice came from his right, melodic, edged with something between humor and warning. Counselor Jalor Merk of the Quorathi Commonwealth drifted up beside him, biosilk robes shimmering with embedded sensors. Jalor's 4 delicate hands rested light on a hovering rail, secondary eyes flickering between the holo-displays and Vaurik's profile. Vaurik's frills rippled in the Syrian gesture of polite acknowledgement. "You flatter me, Counselor. A simple consolidation, nothing more." "A simple consolidation that lets you set tolls on half the traffic to the Orion Spur," Jalor replied. "And perhaps adjust terms for ambitious newcomers." Vaurik's thoughts moved faster than any expression on his scaled face. Ambitious newcomers. Jalor meant humans, of course. "Ah," he said, letting a sliver of amusement into his tone. "Your friends from that little blue world. They are clever, energetic, disruptive, and useful," Jalor said. "Their open scientific exchanges are accelerating research throughout the Commonwealth. Their engineers have increased efficiency in 3 of our older yards by 2 decimal grades. By giving away designs they could have charged for," Vaurik said, not bothering to hide the contempt in his mind. "If not his voice. An unsophisticated species, intoxicated by the idea of sharing. They will learn." Jalor studied him. The counselor already suspected, somewhere beneath layers of caution, that Vaurik saw cultures as puzzles to be solved and assets to be stripped. But Jalor did not yet know how far that disdain extended. "You intend to teach them?" Jalor asked. Vaurik turned back to the waterfalls of numbers. Human names flickered among them, Earth-based startups undercutting Syrian patents, free clinics using human medicine protocols in Quorathi habitats, ship designers on Luna uploading modular hull blueprints to open access. "They are unbalancing the field," Vaurik said quietly. "They break monopoly structures wherever they go. They make long-term contracts harder to enforce. They must either be corrected or absorbed. And if they do not agree to either," Vaurik's jaws flexed in something like a smile, "then I will demonstrate a principle." He had already begun setting it up, of course. Months of subtle purchases, quiet threats, small favors traded. Now, as the ring's traders roared at some unrelated price swing, Vaurik lifted one hand for attention. The crowd quieted with gratifying speed. "Esteemed colleagues," he called, voice amplified by the deck's acoustics, "you have indulged many of my experiments. Today I propose one more." They loved his experiments. The last had been a controlled crash of a failing mineral exchange that netted him and his circle obscene profits. He couched market manipulation as science, and they applauded in return. "A new species has joined our community," Vaurik went on. "Humans. Ingenious. Unpredictable. Some say their cooperative habits are the future, that we must change for them." He let a note of boredom creep in. "I disagree. I propose a test." Interest sharpened. Even those who barely followed political affairs knew of Earth-colorful news items, viral human music clips, open-source thruster tweaks that had quietly found their way into 100 shipyards. "I will, as of this cycle, suspend all my concerns trade to and from Earth." He gestured, and a map of the local spiral arm bloomed in the air. Shipping routes, trade agreements, Syrian-owned nodes, glowing like embedded stars. With your cooperation and that of the major guilds, I will enforce a complete embargo. No fuel catalysts, no critical medicines, no hyperlane services. A ripple of murmurs. Curiosity, skepticism, excitement. A total cut? A Palikar voice called. That will be costly, Dreshaal. For some, Vaurik agreed. For others, lucrative. Here is my proposal. I wager that within 3 standard months, the human world will petition for structured relief under Syrian stewardship. They will trade sovereignty for supply. If they do not, I will absorb all documented losses myself, plus an additional penalty to be paid out to participating partners. He projected the figures into the air. They were generous. Too generous, some thought. Unless he was absolutely certain, Jailor Merc's lower hands, clenched, hidden by robes. You would starve a world to prove a point? To refine a model, Vaurik said. The room heard sophistication in his tone. Only Jailor heard the cold certainty beneath. If they are as resilient as some believe, then no harm will come to them. If not, better to discover their weakness early. Around the deck, magnates consulted aides, did quick computations. A few looked uneasy. More looked intrigued. One voice, scratchy and amused, floated up from a shadowed alcove. And if they surprise you, Dreshaal? It belonged to Jenthar Dravari, independent broker, sometime ally, and sometime irritant. Jenthar's translucent skin pulsed faintly with internal fluorescence as he leaned forward, smile too wide. Vaurik flicked a glance at him. He did not particularly like Jenthar, but he respected the broker's nose for shifts in the wind. If they surprise me, Vaurik said, then perhaps the market will reward them. But I assure you, complex supply dependencies do not build themselves in a few decades, and they cannot be replaced in 3 months. The crowd found this reasonable. Information about Earth was filtered, partial. They had seen the humans' creativity, their strange propensity to release innovations freely, but not the depth of their improvisational culture. Within an hour, the commitment agreements were drafted. Money and signatures flowed. Vaurik watched, satisfied. The trap's jaws were closing. Far away, in a thin blue atmosphere around a small yellow star, no one yet knew, the first sign on Earth came as a garbled report from a freighter captain picked up in a monitoring station on the dark side of the moon, repeating, "Outbound manifest rejected at Helios Gate." The captain's voice crackled. "We've been ordered to hold position. No one is talking to us. Traffic beacons show everything around the node going quiet. This doesn't look like a glitch." On the surface, in an underground command center beneath what had once been a mountain, Commander Bartek read the transcript twice. He was a tall man with iron in his hair and nothing remarkable in his face, until he focused. Then the weight of decades in uniform showed, the habit of anticipating cascades, the memory of close calls avoided by inches. "Run it against the redundancy nets," he said. His operations officer did. The result came back moments later. 3 more freighters, 2 passenger liners, a mining barge, all reporting similar anomalies at different gates servicing Earth. "That's 4 major nodes," murmured the officer, "all changing status within the last 12 hours. Arlen's mind sketched a map of lanes and dependencies. He saw not just ships, but the flows beneath them, medical precursors from Quorathi biolabs, rare metals from Palikar asteroid claims, fuel catalysts from Syrian refineries. He pictured their equivalents on Earth's side. Hospitals with only a month of stock, orbital stations with maintenance timetables tight as drumheads, factories relying on just-in-time deliveries of exotic alloys. "Any word from the Council liaison?" Arlen asked. "None yet, sir. Standard updates only." Arlen nodded slowly. "Raise global coordination. Priority channel." As the secure link spun up, Arlen allowed himself a brief, private thought. This is not a drill, and it is not random. In another continent, under a different patch of sky, Dr. Meera Qureshi sat in a chaotic lab filled with half-disassembled hardware. She was in the middle of arguing with a junior engineer about voltage tolerances when the emergency alert flashed on her retinal implant. Her stomach tensed even before she read it. Years of work on resilient infrastructure for climate chaos had taught her that early warnings seldom brought good news. She blinked through the layers of text. Incoming trade anomaly. Multiple gateways. Preliminary projections of impacted supply chains. She saw what Arlen had seen, but deeper. Red lines spidering through her models of Earth's interdependence with off-world industry. Energy grids losing rare catalysts within weeks. Pharmaceutical pipelines drying up. Spacecraft idle, not from lack of crews but lack of specific, absurdly rare parts. Meera remembered a conference on a Syrian station 2 years earlier. Polite smiles, concealed barbs. A senior conglomerate economist had told her, almost kindly, that Earth was brilliantly naive to build so much on access to foreign networks without backstopping its own. She had thrown herself even harder into designing fallback systems after that. Now she saw exactly how far those would and would not carry them. She was still staring at the projections when a second alert came. Recall to Central Command, Top-Tier Advisory Council. On another continent, in a cramped office above a restaurant that served noodles until dawn, Rosa Nguyen was asleep on a couch littered with printouts and food containers. Her life for the last decade had been motion and people, union meetings, climate marches, relief coordination after floods and fires. She had learned, slowly and painfully, that logistics was as much about trust as trucks. Her tablet buzzed against her shoulder. She fumbled for it, blinking. "Rosa here. You're on the priority list," a familiar voice said. "Global coordination just flagged you. Something's wrong with the gates." By the time the sun cleared the horizon over Lisbon, Lagos, Jakarta, and Los Angeles, Earth knew. Hyperlane traffic reports went dark, then came back with terse notices. Service suspended pending review. Freighters en route to Earth were told to hold at distant waypoints. Those preparing to depart were denied departure clearances by automated systems that refused to explain. At 10 a.m., in the Central Command Center, Arlen stood before a room crowded with uniforms, scientists, and civilian leaders. The air hummed with tension. "The Syrian conglomerate has declared a service pause on all hyperlane access to the solar system," he said. Their notice cites risk of contagion from destabilizing economic norms. The Palikar guilds and 2 major independent consortia have followed suit. Someone swore softly. "In plain language," Arlen went on, "we are under embargo. No ships in, no ships out, except what can slip through on slowboats and whatever we have already moving." Layla Rahmani, standing near the back, lifted a hand. Diplomatic training kept her expression neutral, but her stomach churned. "Have we received any direct communication from Dreshaal, Interstellar, or Syrian authorities explaining this?" she asked. "Only a generic broadcast," Arlen said. "Which you've seen." They had all seen it. A smooth Syrian spokesperson explaining in impeccable trade language that Earth's unregulated dissemination of proprietary technology and destabilizing impact on mature markets necessitated a temporary pause in trade until fair, structured agreements could be reached. Fair, structured agreements. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. Earth would sign over control of its key industries, infrastructures, and scientific output in exchange for being let back into the network. At a news studio in one of Earth's coastal megacities, Talia Eziani stared at the draft bulletin on her screen. The embargo was exactly the kind of once-in-a-generation story every journalist dreamed of and dreaded. Her producer's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We go live in 2 minutes. They want you to keep it calm. No panic, no speculation." She adjusted her mic, watching feeds from other channels. Markets tumbling. Footage of citizens raiding stores. Shots of grounded spacecraft. Their crews gesturing at sealed gates in low orbit. Calm, she thought, would have to mean honest. People could feel lies more keenly now than ever. At 10:05 a.m., she looked into the camera. "Good morning. If you're just waking up, you need to know what has happened. The major gate operators have suspended all hyperlane travel to and from Earth. They say this is temporary. They have not defined what temporary means." Her voice did not shake. It carried a steadiness that millions of viewers clung to, like a railing in a storm. Far beyond Earth, in an office carved from crystalline light above a Syrian metropolis, Vaurik Dreshaal watched Talia's broadcast with detached interest. He saw the flash of anger in her eyes, the tight control in her jaw. He saw the subtle rally in the comments feeds running alongside, people calling for calm, others for revolt, more for unity. He nodded to himself. Humans were dramatic. But drama did not feed ships. "One day," he murmured, "and the first rationing fears begin." His aides projected preliminary figures. Orbital trade flowed down by 80%. Earthbound ships diverted or halted. Commodity prices fluttering, not yet stabilizing around the new reality. He allowed himself a small private pleasure. The anticipation of the next weeks. Fear would rise. Offers would be made. His envoys already had draft support agreements ready, packages of debt relief, emergency fuel shipments, and medical supplies, all contingent on Earth's government signing away key regulatory powers and granting Syrian firms long-term concessions. "Dreshaal," Jenthar Dravari said from the doorway, having slithered past 3 layers of assistance with his usual uninvited ease. "You've upset the news feeds." Vaurik did not turn. "The feeds are there to be shaped. Do you come to complain, Jenthar? Or to speculate?" "Speculate," Jenthar said cheerfully. "I like to know whether I should buy more of your debt or more of your enemies." "You speak as if there is any contest," Vaurik said mildly. "Earth's productive capacity is impressive, yes, but they built themselves into the lattice. They cannot unbuild it in 3 months." "And if they don't need to?" Jenthar asked. "They've always improvised. I've seen human mechanics hold ships together with tape and curses that would melt Quorathi ears." "Improvisation does not synthesize complex pharmaceuticals," Vaurik replied. "It does not conjure fuel catalysts. It does not replace fleets of specialized haulers. They will find ways to stretch what they have. They will not be able to replace what they lose." He turned, finally, eyes cool. "You may place your bets as you like, Jenthar. But understand, this is not a contest between my wealth and their creativity. It is a demonstration of a law. Dependency is slow to build and quick to punish." Jenthar watched him for a moment, then inclined his head. "We shall see which law the galaxy remembers. On Earth, the first week was fear. Lines formed outside supermarkets as rumors outpaced reality. People emptied savings accounts to buy food. Social media feeds spiked with anger at Syrian greed, at human governments, at each other. Arlen Bartek spent most of that week in the command center, eyes burning, mind racing through contingencies. The projections were grim, but not hopeless, if they moved fast. He authorized immediate rationing of key imports. Hospitals were instructed to prioritize essential treatments, postpone elective procedures, and audit every stock of foreign-made medicine. He ordered Earth's orbital fleets to reconfigure their patrols around the hyperlane perimeters, officially monitoring for debris, unofficially watching for any hint of military buildup. He slept in his office. When he did sleep, he dreamed of bottlenecks. One missing component bringing down entire systems. One panicked riot sparking thousands. Dr. Meera Qureshi became the axis of a different storm. Her team's office turned into an impromptu nerve center for global infrastructure triage. Screens covered every surface, filled with colored threads representing water flows, power grids, industrial chains. "We need to know," she told her exhausted analysts on the 3rd night. "Not just where we're weak, but where we can adapt. What can we substitute? What can we scrap and rebuild differently? Stop thinking of preserving and start thinking of transforming." Meera had long believed that redundancy and localization were the keys to surviving planetary-scale threats. Climate chaos, orbital debris cascades, resource shocks, resilience was the common answer. Now, the embargo turned her theories into mandates. She broke her teams into sectors: energy, water, transport, manufacturing. Each was tasked with identifying the single most vulnerable foreign dependency in their area and drafting 3 potential responses that did not involve more imports. "Think ugly," she told them. "Think inelegant. We're not designing for awards. We're designing to not die." In cities, Rosa and Nguyen moved among community leaders like electricity flowing along wires. Years of organizing had taught her where trust lived and where it had been burned. As government pronouncements rolled out rationing schedules, fuel restrictions, new work orders, she listened to how people reacted in homes, markets, underground trains. When a neighborhood in Sao Paulo erupted in protests after a mismanaged distribution drop, Rosa was on the net that evening, talking with local organizers about how to open backyard gardens, how to set up community kitchens, how to volunteer for ration distribution rather than only rail against it. She did not trust every directive from above, but she understood that in this moment, chaos would kill more people than scarcity. Telling people everything is fine is a lie, she said on a late-night call with a regional coordinator. But telling them everything is lost is a bigger one. We need to show them what they can do where they are. Noah Aloe, watching from his experimental fields in what had once been semi-arid land, felt a terrible, grim vindication. He had argued for years that global food systems were too centralized, too dependent on imported fertilizers and seed stock. Now, as orders came in from the Terran Resilience Network activated from the shell of an older climate response body to ramp up local production, he accepted the burden of being right. He convened agronomists from across the planet in a sprawling, glitchy holo-conference. We have to assume, he told them, that import-dependent fertilizer and feed pipelines are about to seize up. That means we have to rebuild fertility cycles locally, at speed. We need to turn every city, every town, into a partial producer, not just a consumer. Someone asked, weary, if urban vertical farms and rooftop gardens could really replace the vast flows that used to come through orbital megastructures. No, Noah said bluntly. They can't. Not entirely. But they can shave the peak. They can turn famine into hunger. There's a difference. They grimaced, but they understood. Talia Eziani's broadcasts became an anchor. She refused to sugarcoat the situation, but she also refused to amplify every rumor. Her crew dug up footage of past crises, storms, wars, pandemics, and how communities had coped. We have been here before, she said to the camera one dusty evening, banners of protest flapping on streets below the studio. Not this exact situation, not with alien corporations at our gates, but we have been close to the edge, and we pulled back through work, not fear. Behind the scenes, she pushed her editors to cover not just government meetings, but neighborhood assemblies, makeshift repair co-ops, farmers opening seed libraries. The story can't just be what Dreshaal is doing, she told them. It has to be what we're doing. They did not yet know how deeply the galaxy was beginning to watch. At the end of the second week, Arlen Bartek called a meeting that changed the crisis trajectory. They used the old emergency hall, a circular chamber designed in a more optimistic era, as a global response coordination center. For once, the name matched reality. Generals, cabinet members, mayors, scientists, union leaders, technologists, and activists filed in. Arlen looked around, seeing not titles but potential vectors of action. We cannot manage this with normal chains of command, he said without preamble. The embargo is not a storm we can wait out. Dreshaal and his partners assume we will fail to adapt before our reserves run out. We are going to prove them wrong. He gestured to a holodisplay at the center of the chamber. It showed Earth's surface and near orbit overlaid with glowing webs, energy grids, transport links, data connections. This is our patient, Dr. Meera Qureshi said, stepping forward. It's sicker than we thought, but it also has redundancies we never used. She tapped a control. Sections of the web brightened. These are systems we can reconfigure with what we have on hand. These are systems we can patch with substitutes. And these, a scatter of blinking red nodes, are where we are truly exposed. She indicated one cluster near orbit. These maintenance depots take in Syrian-made components and send out functioning station modules. Without those imports, half our orbital infrastructure will start to fail within 2 months. Colonel Dmitry Volkov's deep voice rumbled. And if those stations fail, so does our early warning, our navigation, and some of our weather monitoring. Plus, we look weak to anyone who wants to test us. A murmur ran around the room. They had all seen what happened to worlds that looked weak. Then we don't let them fail, Arlen said. Not on their timetable. He turned to Rosa Nguyen. You've been keeping the streets from tearing themselves apart. We need more than that. We need the kind of coordination you've built for campaigns. Scaled up. Scaled up how much? She asked. Planetary? Arlen said. She swallowed, eyes flickering over the map. She thought of the networks she had woven over years. Union committees, linked to neighborhood groups, linked to cross-border coalitions. Janky, resilient, human. Give me access to the emergency channels, she said. And don't try to script my messaging. Arlen nodded. He had no intention of scripting anything. There was no longer time nor legitimacy for top-down propaganda. Kenji Mori, who had been leaning against a pillar, spoke for the first time. He looked like he had slept even less than Meera. Dark eyes, sunken but alert. We're assuming Dreshaal's choke points are only physical, he said. They're not. The conglomerate also controls the financial pipes between systems. Every world that wants to trade with Earth has to go through their clearinghouses. That's as big a leverage point as the gates. Layla Ramani frowned. So even if someone wanted to defy the embargo, their payments would be blocked or traced. Exactly, Kenji said. But we've been running a test bed here on Earth for a different kind of value exchange. Transparent, distributed, hard to corrupt. It was designed for fairness. Now I think we can weaponize it. He outlined the bare bones of his idea. An open ledger, mirrored across countless nodes on Earth and in sympathetic outposts beyond, where transactions were recorded publicly and could be verified by anyone. No central authority to be threatened. No single switch to be flipped. You're talking about undermining Syrian financial hegemony, Layla said slowly. Her diplomatic instincts recoiled at the scale of the provocation and recognized its necessity. I'm talking about giving anyone who wants to deal with us a way to do it without painting a giant target on their backs, Kenji replied. And yes, that will crush Dreshaal's skimming operations if it spreads. He's been charging everyone for the right to breathe. We're about to hand out oxygen for free. The room considered this. Fine, Arlen said. You build your new bloodstream. Meera, you keep the patient alive while we change it. Dimitri, you'll assume responsibility for orbital defense and deception. I want any Syrian flotilla that comes near our system to see whatever we decide they should see. And Rosa. She straightened. You and your people will be the organs, Arlen said. The community councils, the local cooperatives, the farmers, the factory hands. The Terran Resilience Network goes live now, but you will make it real. In this way, a planetary strategy was born, not from a single mind, but from dozens aligned by necessity. As the weeks ground on, Earth changed. Some changes were visible in immediately dramatic ways. Skyscraper rooftops turning into gardens, streets closed to cars and repurposed as distribution lines for food and medical supplies. Unfinished luxury developments turned into local manufacturing hubs. Other changes were less obvious, but no less profound. Software teams that had once built entertainment apps now wrote code to coordinate agricultural inputs and track neighborhood needs. Skilled hobbyists, 3D printer enthusiasts, hackers, repair cafe volunteers became crucial technicians in Meera's rapidly expanding system of modular, locally fabricated components. Noah Olo watched with a mixture of pride and dread as cities embraced Grow Everywhere campaigns. Students who had never touched soil before learned to run hydroponic setups in school basements. Office workers tended bean plants on windowsills during breaks. In rural areas, neighbors pooled knowledge and equipment to switch to crops that regenerated soil while producing usable food. It was not smooth. Mistakes abounded. Early plantings failed. Some distribution nodes were hit by theft, others by corruption. Rosa's teams had to intervene repeatedly to keep trust from collapsing. In one city, an unscrupulous official diverted fuel allotments to favored businesses, starving public transit. Talia's journalists exposed it within a day. The official lost their position and faced community tribunals that, for once, had planetary attention. Sunlight is pressure, Talia said in an analysis segment. In normal times, we treat corruption as inevitable. In these times, it is lethal. We cannot afford to be gentle with those who treat public resources as personal property. Her broadcast was replayed not just on Earth, but on small stations throughout the outer systems, courtesy of Orudani pirate relays, who had discovered that human news attracted good subscription numbers. Those same Orudani, smelling opportunity, began to probe the edges of the Syrian blockade. In a dusty bar on a refueling habitat in the Kuiper Belt, an Orudani captain watched Talia's report with half his eyes, while the other half followed a data feed from a smuggler friend near the Palikar zones. "Humans making their own food?" he muttered. "Might be less hungry when we show up, but more interesting when they do," his navigator replied. "Word is they're also cooking up new engines." The captain's frills twitched. Engines meant contracts. They began plotting a course slightly closer to the interdicted zone. Sensors peeled for any signatures that did not match Syrian patrols. In the halls of Quorathi Power, the unfolding events spun a different kind of conversation. Counselor Jailor Merk convened a quiet gathering in a private chamber. A handful of colleagues, an envoy from the Tselix enclave, and a pale, nervous representative of a minor trade syndicate tired of Syrian fees. They watched a set of curated clips on a suspended holo. Talia's calm fury, Meera's frenzied laboratories, Rosa's town halls in makeshift shelters, Noah's cracked hands planting demonstration plots under a harsh sun. "They are not collapsing," Jailor observed. "They are changing. The Syrians will not allow them to change too far," an older Quorathi said uneasily. "If Earth proves you can cut the cables and still thrive, others will try. Dreshaal will act before that." The Tselix envoy, a being of flickering facets, shifted colors. End quote. "Our analysts estimate a non-trivial chance that Earth's technical adaptations will be worth acquiring. The embargo has forced them into constrained innovation. That often yields rich harvests." "Can you get direct line of sight on what they're building?" Jailor asked. "Perhaps," the Tselix said, "but doing so overtly risks Syrian retaliation. They are already accusing us of sympathy." Jailor glanced at the minor guild representative. "And you? Your masters have done well leasing infrastructure from Dreshaal's concerns. Do you see long-term security in this dependence?" The Palikar blinked slowly. "We see high fees. We see risk that is priced only in Dreshaal's favor. We also see opportunity. If someone were to offer us an alternative engine standard, one not bound to Syrian patents, our guilds might diversify." The room simmered with unspoken thoughts. They all knew the shape of the possibility. Only Earth, under this pressure, had reason to push all the way through the old walls. "We must be ready," Jailor said softly. "If they find a way, we must not arrive empty-handed or on our knees." Somewhere, a quiescent Tselix process was given priority to monitor human transmissions more closely. Back in Vaurik Dreshaal's tower, alarms began to whisper in his datasphere. At first, they were small, unauthorized settlement of transactions on obscure routes, bypassing Syrian clearinghouses. Minor dips in toll revenue from a few lanes, as traffic inexplicably rerouted through longer, less convenient paths. Vaurik's analysts flagged them and were told, politely, to track them. Vaurik had bigger patterns to watch. Famine indicators on Earth had not yet crossed his critical thresholds. He knew the humans would improvise, stretch, delay. He was counting on it. They had to believe in their own resourcefulness long enough to reject early surrender, but not long enough to replace what they were losing. In his mind, he pictured the curve of resilience, a planet pulling together, doing miracles for a period, then exhaustion setting in as systems ground down without replacement parts and replenishment. His models were exquisite, based on centuries of data from other worlds broken in more subtle ways. They did not, however, include a parameter for what happened when an entire species decided collectively to redesign its entire way of life as if it were a broken machine on a workbench. He did not yet see, for example, the code commits flooding into Kenji Mori's open ledger project from every corner of Earth's networked mind. He did not see the old accounting software turned into nodes for a transparent, incorruptible transaction database, linking neighborhood food banks to orbital suppliers, black market smugglers to village cooperatives. He did, however, notice when transactions between two minor Palikar guilds, insignificant in monetary value, failed to appear in his clearinghouse logs, but still resulted in goods moving. "Explain this," he demanded of his finance chief. "It appears, Honored Dreshaal," the chief said cautiously, "that they settled off-ledger. They referenced a publicly accessible record hosted on a human server cluster as proof of payment. We are investigating." "Off-ledger," Vaurik repeated softly. Anger slid like ice under his calm. "Replicate their process, find its weaknesses, and send a friendly reminder to those guilds that their hyperlane access can be adjusted if they continue such experiments." He did not yet consider that the thing he dismissed as a curiosity could, with enough adoption, render his toll booths irrelevant. He was more concerned, in that moment, with rumors of a propulsion project on Earth that used no Syrian catalysts. Seedfire, one of his agents whispered in a secure briefing. "That is the code name we have intercepted. It appears to be compact, modular, and designed to be built from primarily local materials." Vaurik forced his body to stillness. "How mature is it?" "We do not yet know," the agent admitted. "The Terran Resilience Network's internal security is improvised, but dense. They have honey traps everywhere." "Find out," Vaurik said. "Spend whatever it takes. If they gain independent mobility, this experiment ends." He began to consider more forceful measures. On Earth, Project Seedfire was growing from sketches to hardware faster than anyone would have believed possible 3 months earlier. In a cavernous hangar that had once assembled mass-produced orbital ferries, Meera Qureshi walked between prototypes, glimmering containment rings, stacked toroidal reactors, improvised test chambers streaked with scorch marks. "Local alloys only," she told a team arguing over a materials list. "If it can't be refined from what we have on Earth, or in near-Earth space with our own facilities, it doesn't go in. I don't care how much harder it makes the problem." Engineers winced. One muttered, "We could cut the mass by 1/3 if we used Syrian-grade composites." "And need Dreshaal to ship them," Meera snapped. "No, we are not building a new leash." She knew the risks. Fusion was inherently dangerous. Marrying it to a drive system that had to be idiot-proof enough for desperate worlds to copy added another layer of peril. But she also knew the alternative. Without independent propulsion, Earth could produce wonders, and never move them beyond the gravity well safely without Syrian gates. They needed a way out that did not run through Vaurik's toll plazas. At 3 p.m. on a long, hot afternoon, a prototype finally hit its test thresholds. In a reinforced pit far underground, a Seedfire core hummed to life. Sensors registered stable containment, controlled energy output, and, when coupled with a mock-up of a drive assembly, a promising thrust curve. Meera watched the live feed, hands clenched. When the indicator stayed in the green long enough to count as success, laughter and cheers erupted in the control room. She did not cheer. Relief flooded her, but so did a heavier realization. "Now we have a torch," she thought. "And everyone will want fire." She knew the choice that awaited. Hoard Seedfire as a strategic advantage, sell it to a few allies for leverage, or release it completely, letting it spread like an uncontrolled blaze through the galactic economy. She also knew deep down what her own answer would be. The only containment that might work long-term was moral, not technical, deciding to share power rather than monopolize it. Elsewhere in the complex, Kenji Mori was finalizing a different kind of ignition. His ledger, originally a niche experiment in fair trade mechanisms, had become Earth's circulatory system. Ration allocations, resource contributions, labor hours volunteered, improvised barter networks, all flowed into the shared record. Now, the first off-world nodes had come online. An Orudani faction, amused at Syrian consternation, had agreed to host a mirror. A disaffected Select subdivision, hungry for experimental data, had linked in. 2 small Palikar guilds, chafing under Dreshaal's tolls, had begun settling internal trades over Kenji's protocols. "Once it crosses a certain threshold," Kenji told Arlen and Layla in a late-night briefing, "it will be prohibitively difficult to shut down. Not impossible, someone could still, say, destroy enough of our storage infrastructure, but expensive. And the more different factions use it, the less anyone can poison it, without everyone noticing, Layla worried. Vaurik will see this as a direct assault. Do we really want to pick a financial war on top of the embargo? We're already in one, Kenji said. We just weren't firing back. Now we are. On the 91st day after the blockade began, the galaxy expected a show. Vaurik Dreshaal had made sure of it. His wager, though technically private, had leaked in the way such things always did when too many rich beings wanted to gloat. Media channels across known space ran countdowns. Commentators speculated, would humans make a noble plea for help, framed as an act of wisdom? Would they be forced into humiliating concessions? Would they lash out and be crushed, providing a cautionary tale? Vaurik scheduled his appearance in the council's grand chamber with precision. At 11 a.m. station time, he would stand before representatives from every major polity, screens behind him, showing a live link to Earth. A human official, someone acceptable but not too proud, would outline their situation. Vaurik would offer a generous stabilization package. Papers would be signed. Cameras would flash. Dreshaal Interstellar's stock, which had dipped slightly in the chaos, would soar as investors saw his ability to tame wild newcomers and turn crises into profit. He dressed for the moment in traditional Syrian ceremonial garb, jewels calibrated to catch the chamber's lighting in precisely flattering ways. His advisors briefed him on possible human bargaining positions, prepared witty, magnanimous responses. None of them considered the possibility that the humans would seize the stage. At 10:58 a.m., in a studio on Earth patched into the global emergency networks, Talia adjusted her earpiece and breathed slowly. Around her, Arlen, Meera, Kenji, Layla, Rosa, Dimitri, and a skeleton crew of technicians watched the countdowns on their own screens. Seedfire prototype drives waited in low orbit, powered down, but ready. The Bartek line, a mesh of decoy stations and hidden platforms, sat in patient silence. Everybody clear on timing? Talia asked. Once you're live, you'll have at least a few minutes before they can cut you, Kenji said. We've piggybacked our feed onto their internal redundancy channels. They'll have to shut down their entire network routing to fully block it. That would be noticeable, Layla added. And embarrassing. Arlen's jaw was tight. He had argued for a quieter, less confrontational reveal. But the others had persuaded him that spectacle mattered. Vaurik's power was as much about belief as it was about control. Breaking that belief would require more than technical workarounds. Remember, Dimitri said, voice low, the Syrian task force is already in motion. Our watchers picked up engine flares 2 days ago. They'll be here within hours, if not sooner. Meera felt a cold knot in her chest. Seedfire corvettes are as ready as they're going to be, she said. But if we miscalculated, we don't have the luxury of perfect calculations, Arlen said. We have what we have. Talia, whenever you're ready. At 11 a.m., the council's grand chamber lights dimmed. Holographic banners shimmered. Representatives leaned forward in their grav chairs. GalaxyNet audiences tuned in, subscriptions spiking. Vaurik Dreshaal stepped into the focus beam, every movement practiced. Honored council members, esteemed guests, citizens of the Spiral, he began. Today we address a difficult situation with compassion and order. Behind him, a massive screen flickered. The official program called for a neutral council host to open a channel to Earth's designated speaker. Instead, the screen stuttered, crackled, and resolved into Talia Eziani's face. She did not look meek. Citizens of the Spiral, she said, voice steady, eyes burning. My name is Talia Eziani. I am speaking to you from Earth, and before you hear any story about us, you should hear ours. The chamber rustled like wind in a forest. Vaurik's frills flared in shock. This was not possible. The feed was routed through Syrian-controlled relays. His technicians scrambled in panic, hands dancing over controls. Cutter, Vaurik hissed over a secure channel. We're trying, came the shaken reply. They've exploited a fail-safe protocol. If we shut them down entirely, we risk collapsing the chamber's support systems. The council will find a way, Vaurik snapped. Now, on the screen, Talia continued. 90 days ago, certain wealthy interests decided that our way of sharing knowledge made us dangerous. They turned off our access to the lanes. They thought we would fall to our knees. They may have bet fortunes on it." She did not say Vaurik's name, but the chamber's eyes slid toward him as if pulled. "What they did not understand," Talia said, "is that they did not just cut us off. They forced us to discover how little we truly need from them." Images flickered behind her. Crowded but orderly ration lines. Makeshift workshops turning scrap into tools. Fields of grain sprouting in places once dismissed as unusable. "We were scared," she said. "We were angry. But we were not alone. We have always had something that no corporate empire can patent: each other." She narrated, succinctly but vividly, the last 90 days. The Terran Resilience Network's spontaneous birth, Rosa's neighborhood councils, Meera's grim laboratory miracles, Noah's fields, Kenji's ledger spreading like fungus through the bones of the old system. "And while we worked," she went on, "you watched. I know you did. We've seen your messages. We've seen Syrian propaganda about unstable markets and reckless primitives. We've also seen workers on their stations, pilots in their fleets, citizens in their towers sending us quiet signals of support." Her crew cut to prepared statements loaded into buffers. On a split screen, Envoy Vaurik Dreshaal of the Quorathi Commonwealth appeared, 4 fingers raised in the Quorathi gesture of commitment. "On behalf of the Commonwealth," Vaurik said, "we declare that we will no longer recognize exclusive Syrian toll rights in our space. We have adopted human-engineered independent propulsion systems, Project Seedfire, for our own defensive fleets. We stand for a galaxy where movement is not a privilege sold by a few." Vaurik felt his pulse spike. Seedfire. They had done it. And the Commonwealth had already installed it. Another window opened. A Palikar guildmaster, jewelry stripped down to simple bands, gaze firm. "The Palikar guilds hereby announce," she said, "that we are migrating our internal transactions to the Terran Open Ledger. We invite all who wish to trade fairly, without conglomerate skimming, to join us." A third voice, buzzing and layered, broke in. "The Orudani swarm." The pirate-turned-mercenary representative grinned, mandibles clacking. "Offers escort to any Seedfire-driven vessel that chooses to ignore Syrian blockades. Your toll gates are no longer our concern." As they spoke, Kenji's code overlaid live market data on the chamber's central display. Curves that had once climbed smoothly for Dreshaal, concerns now plunged. Syrian bond yields spiked in panic. Dreshaal Interstellar Holdings' valuation shed trillions in minutes. Jenthar Dravari, watching from a side balcony, allowed himself the indulgence of a soft chuckle. He had, of course, positioned himself for this eventuality days earlier, moving assets into human-linked ventures that had seemed outrageously risky to most. On a secure channel, he released the final packet of documents his agents had stolen from Syrian vaults. Internal memos proving council votes had been bought, records of illegal military orders, logs of Vaurik shorting sectors he was about to destabilize. These files did not land on anonymous servers. They exploded onto Kenji's ledger, time-stamped, hashed, and cross-verified in real time by 1,000 nodes from Earth to the outer enclaves. Council members, watching their own names appear in connection with secret favors, blanched. Vaurik's carefully curated composure fractured. "You are broadcasting stolen lies," he said, cutting his personal audio into the chamber feed. "This is economic terrorism. Do not be deceived." "Is this a lie, Dreshaal?" Talia's team had anticipated his interjection. Her feed split again, showing a Syrian internal briefing in which Vaurik's face calmly outlined the expected death toll on Earth under varying embargo durations. Columns of numbers, the likely break point where famine would drive capitulation. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even hardened politicians flinched. "You bet on starving a world," Talia said, ice in her tone. "You called it a model. We call it a crime." In orbit around Earth, at that same moment, Admiral Urbanus Heliox received a terse command: proceed, engage. The Syrian task force, lurking at the edge of the solar system for days, lit its drives. Their mission outline was simple: slip in under the cover of Council confusion, cripple Earth's orbital infrastructure, and plant enough devastation to make any talk of independence moot. Officially, the action would be blamed on rogue elements. Unofficially, everyone would understand the message. But the Bartek line had not been built for show. As the Syrian cruisers slipped into the inner system, they saw what they expected: a planet bristling with too few, too old stations, a scattering of civilian craft, a few repurposed gun platforms with laughable output compared to conglomerate warships. They did not see the decoy beacons until they had already been lured off course. Station signatures led them toward what appeared to be a vital comms relay. In reality, it was an empty shell, rigged to broadcast false telemetry. Inside the real Earth defense network, Colonel Dmitry Volkov watched the Syrian formation adjust. "They're taking the bait," he said calmly. He had spent half his career studying how empires projected force. Syrian doctrine prized overwhelming, precise strikes on known infrastructure. They trusted their intelligence networks. They were not used to being lied to on this scale. "Seedfire units," he said into a separate channel. "Go." From behind the shadow of the moon, from the lee of a Trojan asteroid, and from a disguised bulk transport that had silently reconfigured itself, compact vessels surged into the open. Their drive signatures were messy compared to polished Syrian ships, but they moved with startling agility. Meera's team had designed Seedfire not just for raw thrust, but for control in environments where delay and indecision were death. Neural networks, fine-tuned by pilots in weeks of grueling sims, handled micro-adjustments faster than human reflexes. One Syrian cruiser, turning to target what it thought was a missile platform, found itself bracketed instead by 3 human Seedfire corvettes, their reactors blooming with controlled fury. Dimitri's targeting orders were exacting: disable, do not annihilate. Engines, weapons arrays, comms, leave hulls intact wherever possible. Hit them where it hurts their pride, not their families, he had told his crews. The first volley of human fire lanced out. Syrian shields, tuned for larger, slower threats, misinterpreted the drive's emission spectra. By the time their systems adapted, 2 cruisers were drifting, power gone. On Earth's surface, Talia's broadcast cut briefly to the battle. The galaxy watched in real time as supposedly invincible conglomerate warships spun helplessly, their crews flooding distress channels in voices that sounded very much like the ones they had tried to silence. "This is not a massacre," Talia said over the images. "We are not here to become what he is. We are showing that if you try to cage us, we will open the door, not just for ourselves." She knew, as did Arlen and Dmitri, that making a point in front of the galaxy was as important as winning the tactical engagement. If the Syrians could later spin this as terrorist butchery, sympathy might swing back their way. The Bartek line's hidden platforms pulsed, sending out targeted bursts that scrambled Syrian comms just enough to force reliance on line-of-sight signals. Human pilots swung in to attach hacking rigs to hulls, security teams boarding with cutting tools rather than breaching charges. In the council chamber, feeds multiplied. Some focused on Talia, some on the battle, some on the real-time collapse of Syrian financial instruments. Amid the chaos, an emergency motion was introduced. Freeze Dreshaal Interstellar Holdings assets, pending investigation into allegations of mass coercion, sanction any unauthorized military action in embargoed systems, and establish a commission to oversee emergency aid to worlds affected by Syrian toll manipulation. Under normal conditions, such a motion would have languished in committee. Today, with evidence of Vaurik's calculations unraveling across the ledger, few representatives wanted to be recorded as obstructing it. Hands went up, appendages wavered, consensus, of a sort, formed. Vaurik Dreshaal stood in the middle of his dying empire's living heart and realized something some of his critics had always suspected. He did not actually understand people. He understood incentives, structures, and fear. He did not understand what happened when fear snapped and turned into a determination that did not calculate odds. He had believed that by throttling Earth's lifelines, he could force them to choose between dependence and death. He had not anticipated that they would choose a third path, harder, riskier, built on the assumption that others, watching, were as tired of being throttled as they were. He turned to leave the chamber, to reclaim control in some other theater. But everywhere he looked, he saw screens with his own memos, his own orders, contextualized not as clever stratagems but as attempted murder. Jenthar Dravari watched him go with a complex mix of satisfaction and professional melancholy. Empires were bad for business in the long term. They deadened variety. Their falls, though, were always painful for someone. On Kenji's ledger, Vaurik's personal accounts were marked with special tags: frozen, disputed, subject to adjudication by an emergent, messy coalition of parties who no longer believed in unilateral control. By the time the Syrian task force limped away from the solar system, half their ships disabled and the others nursing damage, the galaxy had seen enough. They had seen human corvettes made from repurposed freighters outmaneuver conglomerate cruisers built in pristine orbital yards. They had seen human medics treating captured Syrian crew with the same urgency as their own wounded. They had seen freed conglomerate logistics officers, blinking in the harsh light of truth, read their own propaganda alongside the reality outside their viewports. They had seen Dreshaal's projected famine curves. They had seen, on the other side of the scale, Earth's stubborn refusal to play the assigned role. On Earth, the mood was strangely muted. There was celebration, yes, but also exhaustion and grief. The embargo had killed people. Not as many as Vaurik had predicted, but enough that every feast was shadowed by someone missing. In the days that followed, offers poured in. New trade agreements, some frantic, some careful, proposals for alliances, invitations to join governing councils, to lead new bodies designed to replace Syrian-dominated institutions. Bartek sat with Meera, Kenji, Layla, Rosa, Dimitri, and a rotating cast of others in a room that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and burnt circuits. "We have leverage now," one young strategist said eagerly. "We could demand tariffs, secure privileged access, become the new gatekeepers." Arlen's gaze was heavy. He had spent much of the last 3 months ordering people into hardship and danger. The temptation to cash in that sacrifice for security was strong. "And become the thing we just fought," Rosa said quietly. Kenji nodded. "Any centralized clearinghouse we control will be just as vulnerable to corruption as Dreshaal's. Maybe not today, but eventually." Meera looked at the Seedfire schematics on the wall. "We built this so no one could ever again turn off someone's sky because they didn't like how they were living." Layla, who had perhaps the clearest view of how messy interstellar politics was about to become, sighed. "Power hates a vacuum," she said. "If we don't fill some of these spaces, someone else will. But maybe we don't have to fill them alone." In the end, Earth declined many crowns. They accepted seats on new councils but insisted on rotation and transparency. They shared Seedfire widely, with clear safety guidelines and 0 licensing fees. They entrenched Kenji's ledger as a commons, not a company, with monitoring bodies drawn from multiple species. Vaurik Dreshaal did not vanish. He could not. His web of enterprises was too vast to evaporate entirely, even with accounts frozen and assets seized. But he was no longer the unchallenged master of markets. He became, instead, a figure quoted in case studies on overreach and the limits of fear. On a warm day months later, on a coastal cliff where new Seedfire-equipped survey ships rose to orbit on blue-white plumes, Commander Bartek stood alone for the first quiet hour he had allowed himself in longer than he cared to remember. He watched a joint human Quorathi Tselix cruise ship shrink into the sky. Its mission was simple and audacious: to travel to unaligned regions, offer tools and knowledge, and ask nothing in return except mutual respect. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Talia Eziani came to stand beside him, camera for once nowhere in sight. "You think they'll listen out there?" she asked. "Some will," Arlen said. "Some won't. Some will try to use what we give them against us." "And we'll regret sharing?" He considered. "We'll regret some things," he said. "But not that we refused to starve someone just because we could." They stood in silence for a while, watching the bright trail arc toward the stars that had once been accessible only at Syrian pleasure and were now, slowly, becoming common ground. On 1,000 worlds, in cramped apartments and open plazas. Beings of countless forms had watched Earth struggle and seen something unexpected. Not just defiance, but a stubborn, flawed commitment to pull others up rather than push them down. In the years to come, that memory would complicate every would-be tyrant's calculus. It turned out that in a galaxy built on scarcity, humanity's most disruptive export was not any particular technology or tactic, but a contagious refusal to accept that someone else had the right to turn off the sky. That, more than any engine or ledger, was what Vaurik Dreshaal had failed to foresee when he placed his bet.